Australia's Great Eastern Ranges are truly remarkable. From the tropical forests of the Atherton Tablelands to the snow-capped peaks of the Grand Australian Alps, they form the most extensive and biologically diverse mountainous realm on the continent. A 2,800 kilometre corridor alive with wonder. Protected for tens of thousands of years by our Indigenous custodians, this is a place that's always been well vegetated, and much of it remains that way today. It includes some of our most loved national parks and World Heritage areas, and many privately owned properties. There are a few gaps where clearing has been extensive and sustained, but our plan is to close as many of these as possible. Working with landowners, communities, governments and industry to create and maintain a true corridor of naturally interconnected lands. In doing this, we hope to mitigate the impacts of climate change and protect our unique flora and fauna forever. The Great Eastern Ranges have long been a place of reliable rainfall. Rich soils and many trees, mixed woodlands, grand old eucalypt forests, natural grasslands, and importantly, most of our precious remnant rainforests. The evolutionary cradle for much of our wildlife today.
This is the last remnant of the oldest surviving rainforest in the world. A forest that once covered more than half the land surface of the planet. A forest that has managed to persevere for 135 million years. This is the ancestral stock of all native fauna and flora in Australia.
It is a miracle this privately owned patch of rainforest near Cairns survives at all, even in remnant form. For since our continent began breaking away from Gondwana, everything around it has changed. Moving 3,000 kilometres northward, at roughly the same rate our fingernails grow, Australia, over tens of millions of years, ventured into warmer climes. It drifted over a hotspot deep beneath the Earth's crust, creating a chain of volcanoes in its wake. It lived through an ice age and countless wildfires. And somehow, through all of that evolutionary turmoil, 1% of our nation's rainforests and other critical ecosystems within the Great Eastern Ranges survived.
This is the last fragment of an ancient rainforest that provides us with insight to the evolution of plants and animals over a greater period of time than any other terrestrial landscape in the world. But for me personally, it's more of a privilege. I get to live in the middle of this ancient rainforest and come face to face with its magic.
These natural cathedrals, aside from their obvious biological worth, provide sanctuary for us all. And it would seem the need to protect them for future generations is growing.
There's fewer cassowaries in the wild than there are giant panda, probably about a third as many. And their survival is critical for 37 species of plant that would become extinct with its loss, plus whatever animals are dependent on those plants. So it's described as a keystone species.
The cassowary, whose ancestors no doubt roamed the earth with the dinosaurs, is just one domino in one sequence, suddenly teetering on the brink. As the destruction of habitat and fragmentation of natural lands continues, many more ecosystems along the Great Eastern Ranges are primed for a fall. But it is heartening to know that people are responding, collectively and individually, to this impending crisis.
I once upon a time was totally opposed to feeding wildlife, and then I saw bulldozers knocking down rainforest, and my animals here all got displaced, and overnight I changed my mind. Their habitat's been trashed, they've got no food, what other option do we have but to supplement their income? This is a mother and her chick here. Come on.
Thylagale is another privately owned refuge for wildlife in northern Queensland. A tiny property swarming with red-legged paddymmelon, orange-footed scrubfowl and the vulnerable musky rat kangaroo.
Yeah, they don't like being called rats at all. They're actually believed by the scientific community to be the missing link in the evolution of the kangaroos.
Like so many landowners and conservationists along the Great Eastern Ranges corridor, David Ambrust has defied the developers and dedicated his life to protecting the creatures that roam freely through his beloved backyard. But looking into the future, will this be enough? John Hunter is a consultant for Parks New South Wales, one of many experts questioning how some of our plants and animals will cope in the coming decades.
The whole thing's a changing scene. And of course, with climate change, we're bringing in a whole new game because it's all happening so fast. We're changing temperatures, we're going to be changing fire regimes, intensities, everything. And I mean, that's going to be a really big challenge for rainforest. This is fairly unprecedented and we'll be living through it partially.
As it gets hotter and probably drier, many species will need to adapt or move to higher areas or lands further south where temperatures and conditions are more conducive to survival. But without meaningful and wherever possible continuous connectivity of natural lands along the Great Eastern Ranges corridor, they won't be able to do this, and many species may ultimately find themselves staring down the barrel of extinction. We can fix this, but time is of the essence, for in some places the corridor will need a long time to repair.
It generally takes over 150 years from a tree from germination to get old enough to have possum holes in it. So you can have a young forest and there's no vacancy. There's just nowhere for them to live.
And if there's nowhere for them to live, then everything higher up the food chain suffers.
We find that the large forest owls, here the powerful owl and the mast owl, they're now threatened with extinction because of mainly through the loss of those hollow-bearing old-growth forests.
Okay, we're coming up to trap 3 over here. Let's see what we've got.
The situation further south is equally dire. In the alpine region of the Great Eastern Ranges corridor, the mountain pygmy possum's days are clearly numbered. Its range is already restricted to just a few scant boulder fields, but as the climate warms, they'll afford little in the way of protection.
Increasingly, we're seeing periods during the winter where we're getting a snow melt, and that's really bad for the possums. About 1 metre of snow or more, it insulates, and you'll find that the temperature below the snow is about 2 degrees. So with global warming, they're getting colder because they're exposed to the winter temperatures, the ambient temperatures, and it can get down to minus 20 degrees here. And a little possum that has to stay at 2 degrees or more, it's going to use a lot of energy to get back up to that 2 degrees.
For tens of thousands of years, under the stewardship of our Indigenous custodians, this breathtaking landscape and the raft of extraordinary plants and animals it carried with it endured and evolved with minimal interference. Most of the natural lands along the Great Eastern Ranges corridor remain interconnected, but where clearing has been extensive and sustained, we will need to recreate the natural landscape from scratch. A growing number of landowners are doing just that, working cooperatively with catchment management authorities, government and non-government organisations such as Greening Australia and Bush Heritage Australia.
We're going to manage our land in a way that's going to sort of help the greater good. Finding ways that are compatible both with production and conservation of some of these species. And that might seem a total anathema, but I think that it's all achievable.
Scottsdale Reserve, the property Owen Whittaker manages for Bush Heritage Australia in southern New South Wales, is providing real leadership, replanting and revegetating key tracts of farmland to restore and maintain connectivity.
It might not be, a totally natural native system, but if it increases
some habitat, if it allows some more animals and birds to operate in that system, that's great, that's an achievement. So it's not going to solve the issue of climate change, but it's going to allow animals that time through evolution to adjust.
Our vision to conserve the Great Eastern Ranges corridor from the Atherton Tablelands to the Australian Alps is a positive, vital response to the potentially devastating consequences of fragmentation and climate change. The New South Wales Government is leading the project, but it's a national strategy that needs support and cooperation from all tiers of government and all manner of community-based organisations, as well as individual professionals and committed volunteers. But time is really of the essence, and we need to act fast.
So there is really an urgency if people really understand what's happening with climate change and how big an impact it's going to have on our grandkids and going to change the world our grandkids will inherit. We really can do better. Something can be done about it, and it must be put as #1 priority.
It is critical that this grand vision is achieved. The people from Eastern Australia work together to conserve the natural connectivity of the Great Eastern Ranges corridor. Apart from safeguarding many of our native plants, animals and ecosystems, it will help protect our own lives and livelihoods. The air we all breathe, the water literally millions of Australians depend on, our recreational playgrounds, and our greatest asset when it comes to tourism, which of course is a major contributor to our present-day economy. In our increasingly fabricated world, we will need nature more than ever. For if we lose our wilderness and with it our wildlife, it will feel as if we're losing part of our own souls. For in these beautiful natural realms, we do have a chance to connect to something real, a chance to sense the great and sacred mystery that lies at the heart of all things. And if we act now, our children and their children's children will have a chance to feel that wonder too. From Atherton to the Alps and beyond.